Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger. Welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Sepp-LaRouche. Today is November 5th, 2020, 2 days after the US election. And of course, the things are still very unsettled in the United States. And I think that's the place where we should start, Helga. I mean, the line coming out is that it looks like Biden is on the verge of getting the electoral votes, but there's been a lot of irregularities. President Trump is filing some lawsuits. I know you have the latest picture. What's the latest that you can tell us?
Well, I think that if everything goes right, then President Trump should be able to prove that there was an unbelievable attempt to steal the election from him. Many people have come out since, such people as Paul Craig Roberts, Willy Wimmer, Roger Stone, and several others, who all point to the incredible event that, in Wisconsin and Michigan, there was a certain lead of Trump. And then all of a sudden, the column of Biden jumped by, in one case, 130,000 votes and 0 in the Trump column. So then there was the very strange event that normally in US elections, the rural results came in late because, it's more tedious to collect them and so forth. In this case, the rural elections result in the swing states, which, were the crucial ones to decide on the vote. The rural results came in first, but all the larger cities like Milwaukee, Detroit, Pennsylvania, and Atlanta, the vote in the urban vote came in late after a certain delay factor. So as if, whoever was rigging the vote had to see how much the margin of Trump being ahead was, so that they could decide how many additional votes were needed to tip it over for Biden. So I think these things are blatant. I think they are obvious. And, this is, one can only characterize it in one way, that the incredible coup attempt, which has been going on against first the candidate Trump in 2016, and then throughout the entire 4 years of his presidency, this attempt to steal the election from him is just the latest phase of this coup. Now, you wouldn't believe this if you would listen to the mainstream media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, BBC, CNN, all of these media, and an amazing Gleichschaltung of the international media, going in line with that, portraying Trump as the absolute, out of control populist who is, making up these things. But if you look at the details, there is no question that this is what's going on. And I really would urge our international audience to not fall for this basically gleichgeschaltet. I don't remember this word now in English. This is what the media were under Goebbels' rule. Don't believe that, but look at the detail. And I think the fact that the polling, which predicted, especially in the last period, a major victory of Biden, they were, to say the least, caught off guard again, like they were in 2016. Which one can read either way, that it was, again, that they were so arrogant and did not think that because of the atmosphere of hysteria and anti-Trump mood, that people would not say openly what their intention was to vote. It can also be part of an effort to demoralize the potential Trump voters by, getting across to them, it's not worth your effort. Trump is going to lose anyway. In any case, the polls were utterly wrong again, like they were in 2016. And, obviously this is a fierce battle. We know that this was planned way back. We had the Project Integrity crowd, which predicted exactly that. But I think that, you have a 50-50 split in the American population, and the 50% of the people who voted Trump, I mean, you cannot eradicate 50% of the population. So there is actually a very good chance that this can be won, and I think you should all be part of helping to accomplish exactly that.
There are already legal challenges that have been filed in a couple of states. And I think the point you just made about this being pre-planned is really worth emphasizing. That we were told weeks before the election that the mail-in voting would create a change, that Trump would be ahead on election eve, which is exactly what happened. But then as the mail-in ballots were counted, it would turn it around so that Biden would be on top, and then that Trump would claim fraud. So they all had this pre-planned. But they also were preparing for the possibility that they would have to put boots on the street, whether it's Antifa or Black Lives Matter, to create chaos. Now, Helga, I think one of the things that's really interesting is the contrast between what Trump did with a whole series of rallies of very large crowds versus Biden, who was basically talking to his staff members and barely came out of the basement. I don't think this has been covered in Europe at all, has it?
No, there was absolutely no reporting about the caravans, the mobilization of the Trump base. And just today, which is sort of after the election, Münchner Merkur, which is a newspaper in Munich, they had for the first time the story that Biden obviously has lost it because he mixed up his daughter in his granddaughter and his son. He couldn't remember Trump's name. He mentioned George something. So, I mean, there is a clear awareness and all the politically interested people, who did watch the videos of the campaign naturally knew about it. But, I mean, there is very clearly the game plan that Biden is not supposed to be president maybe for a couple of weeks. Then Kamala Harris is supposed to become the president. And with her, naturally, the entire apparatus of the Obama-Hillary Clinton crowd, and that would mean clearly an escalation of war against Russia and China, because we should remember, and that's also something which is lost on the international audience because of this incredible rigging of the media, that Trump, who obviously has not done everything right, and one can argue about certain points, but the most important strategic issue is the question of war and peace. And anybody who is clearly, in reality, must understand that in the age of thermonuclear weapons, if you have any kind of superpower confrontation, that means the extinction of civilization. And I think, that many people also in the left spectrum, like Mike Cravell, I was just listening to a program with him on Consortium News, and he made the absolute correct point that, if you had a Biden presidency, a war with China is almost certain. If you look at the entire war deployment, of encircling Russia, encircling China, the whole effort to expand NATO into the Indo-Pacific, the confrontation around Taiwan, the South China Sea. I mean, this thing with a Biden presidency could go completely into a confrontation in the very short time. So I think it's really important that people remind themselves, or really restudy and think, and not be ideologically so absolutely, opposed to Trump, because, it's simply what the media are trying to tell you. The real issue is, with what president of the United States do you have a chance to have some, peaceful relations with Russia? And hopefully, Trump would also be able to walk back on his accusations against China, which were completely unfounded. And, that has to be remedied. But with the Biden Kamala Harris crowd, there is absolutely no way how you can have a peaceful relationship with the other major nuclear powers. So I think people have to really rethink this whole thing and not be manipulated by this orchestration of the biggest, the biggest media manipulation I have seen in my life, for sure.
Helga, one of the interesting points that we've raised, it was also raised by Roger Stone, is the fact that you have the people running the Transition Integrity Project and the Voter Integrity Project are the same people who were involved in regime change and color revolutions. One person in particular, Norman Eisen, wrote a book called The Democracy Playbook, which reads like exactly what they're doing with the Trump-Biden election, but they already ran this in Ukraine. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Maidan scenario, which was applied against the legitimate government in Ukraine with the attempt to put in a neo-Nazi government with the help of Victoria Nuland and Biden at that time, was the appointment. Biden was, just to mention that, in absolute cahoots with the Obama interventionist wars in the Middle East, but that you have now the model of the color revolution, which was attempted, in many countries around the world, in Eastern Europe, it was attempted against Russia, which did not function. It was attempted against China, first with the yellow umbrellas, then later with Hong Kong. It's now being done in Belarus. It's really attempted. It was attempted with the Arab Spring. That same method, according to the playbook of Gene Sharp, that is now being played out inside the United States. And anybody who studies the method of destabilization, of financing the NGOs, of having endless resources, to give people the means of posters, various travel means, and so forth. It's the method which is being deployed right now, and I think it's maybe not exactly related, but the fact that the Soros machine is now also that they succeeded to decriminalize the drug in Oregon completely, so that you have now heroin, opium. It's all legal to basically, or it's not criminal anymore to use. I mean, that is a method of empire, of trying to control the population. And the apparatus which is behind that is really world government. It's not something limited to one country, but it is the effort to really impose a global dictatorship where the populations are being manipulated. The populations are supposed to be, docile through drug use and entertainment and so forth. It's a method behind that, and I think people have to really study that in great detail.
Now, what you just mentioned in terms of world government becomes very interesting, because there's been little or no discussion in the campaign, especially from the Biden side, of economic policy. What would they do other than the Green New Deal? And yet in the background, there's a very distinct and serious move toward this global digital currency policy, which is precisely a regime change in finance, as they call it themselves. How dangerous is this move toward a global digital currency?
Well, I think it's fully operational, and it's something which people really should oppose, because it is the instrument of total. It goes along with the NSA, CGHQ, total surveillance state. Well, what is happening right now is that they are talking openly about how to maximize the profits of the speculators. The show was given away by J.P. Morgan Chase, who put out in a newsletter to their clients that more lockdowns because of COVID-19 are very welcomed, it's not so bad if the industries collapse, because then the governments will have to give more stimulus packages, and these stimulus packages naturally will go to the big banks, and therefore they make the stock market and security market go up, and therefore people can make more profit. I mean, that's the basic message which they have put out. Now, that just shows you that they have zero concern about real production. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why they don't like Trump is because Trump represents the potential that he would go back to a real industrialization program for the United States, and eventually work with other countries doing the same thing. So the plan right now, and Lagarde, who is the head of the ECB, former head of the IMF, she just said, that the ECB is fully preparing to create a digitalized euro, and that all the other major central banks, the 7 largest central banks in the world, are moving full-time, high speed, to prepare digital currencies to go on the market by spring of 21. And that is then supposed to be the Great Reset. Now, the Great Reset means if you have, and naturally they say this will not immediately mean the elimination of cash, but that is just, temporary putting, people at ease. But the idea is, China obviously has already very much digitalized their paying by your smartphone, pay all your bills, order taxis. All of this in China is already much, much further developed than in the West. But the difference obviously is that, if you have an economy which is geared towards the common good, to increase the average income, like China has, without anybody being able to debate that, they have pulled 850 million people out of poverty. They are right now, and Xi Jinping has taken personal charge of that, trying to alleviate all rests of severe poverty in the furthest corner in China. And naturally, China is the only growing economy under COVID-19 conditions, while all the other major economies are collapsing this year. China has managed to get the economy back on the growth directionality, and it's moving to increase the middle class, to increase the buying power of the own population. And naturally, the question, if you have then such a thing like digitalization, it's not detrimental, or it doesn't have to be detrimental to the interest of the people. But if you have a society where the speculators are supposed to get everything, and the middle class is being destroyed, you have a situation where just contrast this idea of digitalizing all the currencies for regime change, for what the central bankers and main leading financial players discussed already last year in Jackson Hole, the regime change whereby the central banks would basically take over from the governments. Now they want to have not only monetary expansion, because it turns out that quantitative easing is not enough to keep this bubble going. They want to now have fiscal stimulus, meaning that the governments themselves have to put in money for basically to keep the profits of the big banks and speculators going. Now, that is in total contrast. If you look at the fact that we have a pandemic, which is still going on, it's basically getting out of control. If you look at the infection rates, you have almost all European countries being in a lockdown again, or a severe reduction in what people can do. Then you have the hunger crisis. 7 million people died already this year of hunger. Beasley, the head of the World Food Program, said that if there is not an immediate change, meaning providing at least $5 billion, which is the proverbial peanuts, 30 million more people will die in the next several months. But next year, if this is not reversed, there is the danger of 260 million people dying of hunger. Now, nothing of that is being addressed by these monetarist schemes, the idea to have digital currencies. It just means a complete depopulation policy, because what the Great Reset in this context means, all financing into anything but green technologies will be stopped. You will only have financing of solar, wind, biomass, and similar things. And it would be the, basically implementation of world government through the control of all financing. And that is the Great Reset. Now, just to mention that, there is a big debate right now among, people who have conspiracy theories about COVID. The big mistake they make is, they somehow link these two things together as if the Great Reset would mean, to basically impose vaccination dictatorship and all of these things. These are two completely separate things. We have discussed many times that the pandemic would not be a pandemic if the IMF, the World Bank, and the leading financial institutions would not have lowered the living standard of especially the developing countries over decades, since 50 years. If every country would have a modern health system like the Chinese have demonstrated to have had in Wuhan, it would not be a pandemic. Why is it that certain Asian countries have been able to control the situation so much better? Now, I think it is really extremely important to not go in the direction of this digitalization of the currencies. And there is only one remedy, and that is what my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, has prescribed since many years. Namely, you need to end the casino economy. You need to impose Glass-Steagall, the separation of the banks. You need to, in the case of the Federal Reserve, nationalize the Federal Reserve, turn it into a national bank, kind of reconstruction finance corporation, what Roosevelt did, and then start to issue long-term interest credit with low interest for real investment in industrial production, but especially high energy flux density areas, such as the crash program on fusion, space development, international space cooperation, to increase the productivity of the economy. Now, that obviously is all absolutely the opposite of what this Green New Deal is, and that is being fought out right now. This is not something which can wait until next year. And I think we have to start to educate the population right now, because these central banks are not waiting for what comes out of this election debate or dispute war in the United States. But I think this danger of a global dictatorship through the central banks is something people have to wake up right away.
I think one other point we can make is that the leader of the International Monetary Fund, Georgieva, is now talking about a new Bretton Woods, taking the words from your husband, from Lyndon LaRouche, but meaning the Green New Deal, meaning the digitalization. When was the International Monetary Fund concerned with actual development in these poorer countries? So I think people really have to take what you just said seriously and study this and become part of the fight to get a real new Bretton Woods. Now, as we have the election situation unfolding in the US, this banker's dictatorship, there's something else which is going on which often is a distraction from taking on these other issues. And that's this question of terrorism, which we've seen now rising up again in Europe, the strategy of tension. What can you tell us about that? What's going on now?
Well, we have clearly a pattern. You had the unbelievable event with the French teacher Paty, who was decapitated in an unbelievable act of cruelty because he discussed the anti-Mohammed caricatures. Then you had the incident in Nice where 3 people were killed by somebody who had entered Italy as a migrant on September 20th. He was clearly radicalized already then and just pretended to be a migrant. Then he went to France, and 3 weeks later he committed this atrocity in Nice. Now that should also give people to think, because he entered Italy before this incident with the caricatures even occurred. Then you had the next incident or attack in Vienna, where somebody, a person of 20 years of age, who was already known to the authorities that he had wanted to immigrate to Syria in a group of 90 people, which was stopped by the police. Then he went to Slovakia, tried to buy weapons. The Slovakian authorities informed the Austrians about this incident. It was ignored. So it is now several arrests were made in Austria and Switzerland in the context of this. So it's obviously a network of Islamicists linked to networks in the Balkans and also in the North Caucasus. Now we should remember that the strategy of tension always has been applied when there were major other events to be implemented, and I think it has everything to do with what we discussed before. Both naturally the aim of the British Empire, the oligarchy, to steal the election from Trump, which has to occur in an area of complete distraction. But then especially also the fact that underlying all of these things is the fact that the financial system of the British Empire is bankrupt and can only be pumped up by this incredible liquidity injections, what we have seen in the recent 10 years or so, or actually 11, 12 years since the crash of 2008. So the strategy of tension always has been used as a way to cause regime change, to cause changes in government by creating an atmosphere of panic, get the population to accept things. And we should remember that the whole Gladio networks of NATO, they were responsible for the terrorism wave in the 70s and 80s in Italy. The whole Baader-Meinhof group in Germany was clearly aimed at making sure that the German unification did not result in the kind of realizing of the incredible historical chance which that great moment of history meant by having a third generation of the Baader-Meinhof group assassinating Herrhausen. There were documentaries even in German TV that this third generation never existed. Nobody could ever establish its actual existence. Then naturally Rohwedder was killed, the head of the Treuhand, which was then used to go for this complete economic, shutting down the industries in East Germany after the unification. So you can always see very clearly assassinations like the Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X. These were the kinds of strategies which always had to do, with trying to cause paradigm shifts. And I can only say that the present terror wave, which hit France and Austria, also the British put in the British on high terror alert, not because they claim any concrete evidence, but they say that a terrorist attack is very likely. And now the former head of the FSB anti-terror unit of Russia Litsenko, he just came out with a very important article saying that people should not just look at these incidents, but they should look at the headquarters of these terrorist events, pointing to Saudi Arabia and the city of London. And I think this is something one should absolutely be aware of, because, whatever happens with the election in the United States, when Trump won in 2016, Lyndon LaRouche absolutely was emphatic, saying this is not a national event. This is an event of strategic importance. And he put it in the context of that time of the Brexit, then the Yellow Vest in France, the revolt in Italy against the change of the constitution, and naturally the Trump election. Then we had similar rebellions against this globalist order in Chile, in Lebanon, in many other countries in Northern Africa. And I think that that is still the battle. There is this absolute recognition by increasing number of countries or sections of these countries that this globalist world order is really, totally violating their interest. And that's why you have such movements like the Trump movement, anti-Wall Street. And I think to Trump's absolute credit, he made a statement where he said, he did not ask Wall Street for money. He could easily have asked them, getting 25 million from several large firms, what Biden apparently did, who outspent Trump by quite a margin. And also the anti-Senate races were financed big time by Wall Street. So Trump said he didn't do that because if you take their money, you can't deal with them in a proper way. So I think we should be aware of it, because the actions which need to be taken may come much earlier than people think. Trump will be in for sure until the 20th of January. We may see financial developments which require that he acts much, much earlier in a concert, with other countries, naturally. And I think the summit that should not wait, a summit with minimum Putin and Xi Jinping. China is right now proposing a new world economic system following the COVID crisis. So I think that there are urgent issues which need to be addressed. And the ideas of Lyndon LaRouche are fortunately an absolute wealth of what needs to be done.
Well, Helga, I think this report you've just given, including the move toward a banker's dictatorship, the strategy of tension and how it fits in, this is absolutely essential for anyone who's going to participate in the fight to overturn the attempted coup around the vote fraud. So I think people should be very thankful that you brought this forward. They can go to the LaRouchePAC.com website and find updated developments, reports on the fight against fraud, and also these leading issues. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you again next week.
Till next week.